All right, my friend. On this version of On the Path, it seems as if I'm in your hands. So why don't you kick us off, Yash?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I get to play podcast host this time, which should be fun. Never really done it before. So here we go. Um, Welcome back to On the Path. You're here with Yash and Mike. I'm really excited about today because I get to interview you, Mike, about something that you're really passionate about, and I think everyone needs to hear more about, which is what is meaning? How do we create it? What is it? How do we find it as humans? You have been really deep in this work for a very long time. Most notably, I think, with your podcast, which is called Mike's Search for Meaning, which you've been running for how long now?
I started interviews about 2 years ago. I started releasing episodes in November of 2021. So that's coming up on 2 years also.
Yeah, yeah, wow. And you've interviewed dozens of people at this point about their search for meaning. I've been lucky enough to be on it, and yeah. Without further ado, that's what this conversation is about. Just really getting into meaning and meaning making, and what that means, for lack of a better term. Before we started recording, Mike, we were talking a little bit about some of the interplay of different tensions in our lives, whether they be masculine energy and feminine energy, or the desire to move forward in action or sit back in solitude and stillness. Um, it's I'm curious how you think of, well, before we get into that, what does meaning mean? How do we create meaning? What is it?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, I think there's already so much that's bubbling up in me. So I think it'll be helpful to talk about it the way that I frame meaning, and then we can start to deconstruct what meaning is in the first place. But I think that when I came into this question of what is meaning, what is purpose, fulfillment, first of all, one of the challenges I had was that it was to be found in air quotes out there, right? Like that meaning is something that is attached to a certain job that I'm doing or a certain type of work. And so a lot of my own inner work has been around letting go of that story, because that's a fragile story to have. That meaning is only for coaches, healers, people of a certain job title, CEOs, right? That's really fragile, and that's something that I have brushed up against many times. So given that, putting my lens aside and the deep dive that I've done in my podcast, what constitutes a meaningful life, I could share a couple of the through lines that I've seen from a lot of people. one
Mm-hmm.
one is that, have you ever heard the saying that we're all spiritual beings having a human experience?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Some people say the opposite, actually. Some people say we are human beings having a spiritual experience, but I like that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And when I hear that, what it evokes for me and what guests have shared with me is that there's this beautiful dance that we can do in life where life is almost happening through us. It's a conscious leadership group term, that life happens through us. That if we are able to listen to the signals that are being broadcast to us with our thoughts, through our heart, through our soma, our feelings, sensations, that we are always getting information that we don't have to work very hard for, communicated to us, given in our interactions, what we care about. All of that comes up based on our ability to listen to ourselves. And so one of the major through lines that I hear in terms of a meaningful life is people that are attuned to what matters to them and moving through life in that way. So it put in a maybe a more corporate executive way, if we know what we value and know how to follow through on what we value and act on our values, then that's one way to look at a meaningful life. I think
Wow.
yeah, do you want me to pause there, and we can see where else we can go? I have a lot of other things queued up in my mind right now.
Keep going, keep going. That was beautiful. I think just such a profound statement to say that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. I have this visual of myself as a container or just a
Hmm.
vessel for something greater moving through me. Um, I want you to keep going, but I was reminded of this quote from, I think Nelson Mandela said it, and he said, "We are light bulbs, and it is our job to remain screwed in such that the divine light can shine through us."
Mm. Yeah. Could you say that one more time because it got a little choppy on my end? I just want to make sure
Okay.
that it goes through clearly because I caught what you said. So we are light bulbs.
We are light bulbs, and it is our job to remain screwed in such that the divine light can shine through us.
Yeah. A much more succinct and really profound way of saying what I was just saying. Love that.
You can say it. Nelson Mandela did. Quote was
Yeah.
behind. But yeah, what else did you have in what else was coming up for you?
Well, Mandela had it right. So I think another thing that is coming up for me, I like there are certain types of we'll call them challengers that I've had on my podcast, people who really push up against what convention is another way of saying it, who would
Mhm.
almost scoff at the question. And I like I'll get to what I mean when I say like this is what a meaningful life is, that uh what it gets at is we're all storytelling machines. And if we're buried in a certain version of what a meaningful life is, and I think in personal development there are lots of narratives about what it means to have impact and what it means to have scale, and there's nothing wrong with those things, but if your entire life is dedicated to having a large following and impacting a lot of people and you're not currently doing that, that leaves a massive gap. That leaves like a I will only arrive if type of energy. And the people that have this challenger and scoff at energy are able to almost make anything a meaningful. When we dissect the storytelling machines that we are, anything could be a really incredibly meaningful experience, right? So like me sitting down and watching a TV show with my wife that we connect on is meaningful. And me taking the garbage down and having the garbage picked up by another person who's doing their job and might have their own meaning about what it means to take care of the garbage and put it away, of like that's really making a difference with the planet, is meaningful. And what I love about this is that meaning then becomes a story that's available to me in any single moment, right? It's not about, even the first one I gave is a beautiful sentiment. I love that. And it being attuned to my needs and my desires and my values, those are all really important things. And if I can take any given template or blank slate of life experience and say, there's something really meaningful about this. What's meaningful to me about this? That it's a way of being instead of I don't know, figuring out a certain thing that I need to be doing for it to be meaningful. And that has been a really helpful lens for me as someone who in a lot of ways wants to make a big impact and create change at scale. And I look at all the systems that we operate in as a nation and as a world, and I want to impact those systems, but also having a great conversation with you and speaking to my parents and things that are maybe mundane or
Mhm.
ordinary are beautiful. I love looking at it that way. So what there's again, I could just ramble forever, but uh, what's being sparked for you here?
Wow, that's so good. I loved what you said about meaning as a story and a way of being. I hadn't really thought about it put that way. And I guess one of the implications that comes out of that is that we can change our meaning whenever we want.
Yes.
We really do have the power. It's not there's nothing sticky about it unless we choose to make it sticky.
Hmm. And what
Um,
you're saying about practice, but if we practice like I am, you could even say I am meaning if you really want to go into a little bit of woo-woo territory, but
yeah.
I I am the type of person who creates meaning, and that's at an identity level. Then that's something you could practice. There's actual reps that you can get in terms of scanning for things that matter to you. So we do this with gratitude, appreciation, abundance, right? Like it's spoken about all the time. You can do the same thing with meaning. That if you're looking for meaning in any given moment, then you're going to be the type of person that lives a meaningful life, because it's not about what you're doing, it's about your way of being.
Wow, that's so true. I'm gonna just recap that for just to make sure I understood it. Meaning and creating meaning is a form of an identity. Maybe just put more simply, meaning is an identity. Um, Identities are powerful because we get to choose what those identities are. And if I have the identity that I'm going to create meaning, it's like an example that's coming up here is Mr. Beast. Um, one could argue that he's doing meaningful work. He's creating entertainment for millions of people. He's philanthropic. His story, which I was listening to recently, so he dropped out of high school and told himself, adopted the identity that he was going to become the number one YouTuber in the world,
Mm.
and worked at it for a decade and has organized his entire life around this identity. Um, and it's paying results. It's paying off. Like we see it now manifesting in the real world. And I'm curious to talk about that link a little bit between meaning as identity, meaning as a story, and manifesting results from that in the real world.
Mm. Yeah. So what specific is that you want me to just jam a little bit on what that is?
Yeah, that was just a thought. I'm curious if you've encountered that at all.
Mm. I mean, when I hear, what's his name, Mr. Beast, is that his name?
Yeah,
Who I actually haven't heard of. I don't know Mr. Beast.
so
So
he's like the most prolific YouTuber I think of all time, and has like a couple billion subscribers and creates these like grand mega scale videos and does like a bunch of philanthropy. Um,
yeah.
and he's like in his late 20s, I think.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So this feels aligned with what I was speaking to earlier. That actually this is what comes up for me when I hear something like that. It just sounds like what happened in the time when he made that proclamation and was building towards, like, what type of person was he as he built that following? Was he saying, I just need 50,000 more followers? Was he proud of himself for the process that he was in? Like, to me, the meaning isn't in the taking on the identity of I can get billions of followers on YouTube. It's, did he love the process of creation of
Mm,
those videos? And if he didn't, and if it was all about the results that he wanted to achieve, then that sounds like it might be hollow. I would love to hear what his vantage point about it is. I would guess that at least a large part of him just enjoyed the creation, enjoyed the process of creation, giving value to people.
yeah,
And that's available to anyone at any time, right? Then if we come from a place of scarcity and insufficiency, not enough, I need more, those are the type of stories that hold us back from creation and doing something that feels aligned for us anyway. And for someone that's driven like him, scarcity might show up in the following being the thing that I'm chasing, or the status, the finances, the connections, meeting other people that are famous, right? uh and I get buried in those all the time too, so that's something that we could speak about, right? Because those are culturally really strong, they're pervasive.
yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna notate that to come back to. Um, I wanna talk about how we've talked about sort of what meaning is and how it's accessible. How do we how do we find it? Say,
Mm,
talking to a 10-year-old, right? And I think a large, my experience growing up was that I was told from every angle that I need to figure out what is meaningful to me and what my purpose is in the world. And
yeah.
this ethereal thing that I never really had any good guidance as to how to do that. But I was always told that it's important to figure that out.
Yeah,
How
me
do you
too.
do that?
Yeah. So one way to cut to it, and I actually am wanting to deconstruct a little bit, like the podcast that you introduced in the beginning, my podcast, Mike's Search for Meaning, implies that meaning is to be found, right? I have to go find it, go get
Yeah.
it. And I would invite the opposite to be true. And so one question that cuts to that, instead of searching for and finding meaning, is what do I care about? And there's a lot of times in my experience, there's a surface level answer that emerges. But what do I really care about? You maybe ask yourself a few times to drop a couple levels in, because an initial answer might be, I care about my friends, I care about my family, I care about making good money, security, stability. But I'm not talking, those are great things, and I care about all those too. But on a level deeper, maybe it's like, what type of art are you drawn to? What type of movies are you drawn to? What type of people are you drawn to? Who's a hero that you look up to? And what do they represent for you? What do they embody? What values? What does Nelson Mandela represent to you? And from there, you're starting to identify what actually matters to you. Because I think that all of us, it's buried in there somewhere. We have things that we care about. We have truths that we believe that aren't truths in the world, or at least fully truths in the world. Like one for me that matters to me, that I feel into a lot, is I just really believe that every single person on this planet could thrive. And a word for that would be equity. Like I
Mm,
really care about thriving for all people.
wow.
I care about equity. And that's not something that's true in the world. It is not an equitable world for every single person that's born at this point. But uh, a lot of meaning is derived from me taking actions that show that I am the type of person that cares about equity. Like, for example, every episode of my podcast, I donate to an organization like you did too. I will donate to the Vipassana meditation center that you have presence. It fosters healing. It fosters connection with self. So all these words that I'm speaking about, they're just words, but they mean something to me. I don't
Yeah.
know why. I could dig a little bit. I mean, part of it's my programming, but I think some of it's innate. Like I just was born with a certain predisposition to want to understand and help people. And that's something that matters to me. Someone
Wow.
else might really love, like I work in accounting, and so I work part-time in accounting, and someone might love that they get to be the steward of someone's, tax strategy for the business. That might be really meaningful to them for some reason that is really personal to them. So it's a personal choice. I think asking again what matters to me, and going a couple levels deeper than we normally give ourselves permission, than I normally give myself permission to do, then I can start to piece together what meaning is for me.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that is coming up for me too is that this is an iterative process, right?
Hmm.
That also change over time. And that when I have done a variant of this exercise for myself, the first answer that I got, even after just sitting with it for an hour and really trying to dig deep, it changed pretty rapidly
Hmm.
as I let this soak in my consciousness. One of the things, there's so much in what you said, that was really beautiful. I'm curious, like, how have you tested and iterated on what meaning is for you, or how do you keep present to how that changes?
Yeah, well, aptly said. It is fluid. It evolves. We evolve. I think one thing I haven't explicitly said so far today that's helpful for me is what brings up pain for me, or what's something that I have a strong reaction to, because that's good information for me to keep paying attention to. Like if someone is if I see someone being bullied, that brings up some stuff for me. I don't like seeing that. And so what does that signposting me towards? Well, it could be equity. So there's a level of equity. There's a level of care, compassion, connection. Those are all big ones. And belonging is another one that is really big for me, where and peace, actually, peace is a huge one for me. Like, if I have inner peace in myself, if there's peace, I really believe that if everyone really felt that about themselves, then a lot of the other stuff, the challenges we face, the suffering, it would, not the challenges would go away, but they'd be handled with much more ease. And so this is a long-winded way of saying I pay very close attention to the things that I feel pain about, and I pay close attention to what brings me joy too. Like, when do I feel best? When do I feel like, life is this incredible dance? And it depends. It's every moment there is something different. Like, I get a lot of joy out of to your point before we hit record, like, sometimes inner work feels exhaustive. We're trying to think our way through all this stuff. It could be a lot. Sometimes the simple pleasures of what I did as a kid, what did you enjoy doing as a kid? Meaning could be, I'm just going to go play basketball for 15 minutes. I love playing basketball. There's no agenda. Like, what would I do if there was no agenda, no outcome I was looking for? Is another that signposts me towards what's meaningful play for me, what brings me joy. What if no one was if no one was paying me for the thing that I was going to be doing, what would I enjoy doing? And that's the one I have the hardest time with. I really struggle with that one. But these are
Me
all
too.
things, yeah, these are all things that can be really helpful as we deconstruct meaning in the kind of different buckets of our life. Like, what's a meaningful friendship? What's a meaningful spousal relationship? What is meaningful work? Meaningful play? All of it.
Yeah. Wow. So much there. I want to call out. I had an aha moment when you brought up the question of what brings me pain and what triggers me. I didn't understand the link to meaning there, but I think what we're saying is that we understand ourselves almost through negation, right?
Hmm.
And so then the negation of what brings me pain could be a good proxy for what I value and what I care
Mm-hmm.
about. Right? That's the link there. And that's a really beautiful question because we may not be able to answer. I struggle to answer, and this is an evolution for me of what play looks like for me and what I would do
Mm-hmm.
if I had no agenda. But I can very clearly answer, very quickly answer what triggers me and what brings me pain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the opposite of that is actually a pretty good proxy of what brings me meaning. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. So, like, are you willing to share an example of something like that? If you walked out into the streets
Yeah.
in Austin right now, and what would be something that you could witness, or something that would happen to you that would bring up pain?
Yeah. One of the things for me is that really that brings me pain every time I see it is seeing like unhoused people, homeless
Yeah.
people on the street. It's it's summer in Austin right now. It's easily in the upper 100s. We're like getting like constant notifications of heat waves. And it brings me a lot of pain to see people have a lack of freedom and resources to be able to live a comfortable life and explore the things that bring them joy, and just see people in survival mode like that.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, that one really affects me, and which is interesting because I have a core one of my core values is freedom, well, two
Yeah.
actually, flexibility, um and those are both at threat in that scenario that I just described.
Yeah. So when you see someone who's unhoused on the streets, it signposts you, it brings up pain for you, and it signposts you towards your core values of freedom and flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah, it's so good.
yeah, yeah. So, and what, I mean, we don't need to do this in real time, but what I would encourage someone else to do is that if you are locating these values, then clearly define what does freedom mean to you, and what are some ways that I can embody freedom, or commitments I can make that I act on freedom. Like, what is freedom in action for me on a moment to moment daily basis? What is flexibility to me on a moment to moment or daily basis? Things like that. And what do they mean? Because flexibility and freedom could just be words to other people. They might not have the same meaning. And your definition to someone else who cares about freedom and flexibility might be substantially different to someone else. You know, like someone might look at freedom as just I get to marry any person that I want to.
Right.
That'd be huge for me. That's
Yeah.
fucking awesome. Pardon my
Yeah.
French, but like that's making it personal is really what I'm imploring here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good push. One thing that came up um with that is, so I want to reference some wisdom from Oliver Berkman, who wrote 4,000 Weeks.
Hmm.
Have you read that, Mike?
Yes.
Okay, such a good book. Yeah, I want to, and one of the things that he talks about is actually that meaning, the way that we create meaning, we as human beings exist, he says, as time. That we don't like have time or get time, but really our experience is time. Um, and so much of why we even ask this question of meaning is that we have finite lives,
Hmm.
and at some point we will die. And his point, taking that a step further, is that constraint in our lives is actually what gives us meaning. By choosing to, and the root of the verb decide is desire. It's the Latin. It actually means to kill. Uh, and so when you decide something, you actually kill off all the other options here. When you choose
Hmm.
to marry someone, you chose to marry Ari, you are saying no to all the other potential partners that you had out there. When you chose to have a child, you're saying no to the potential flexibility that you have if you remain childless, right? And that choice, that decision to limit our flexibility and freedom is what gives us meaning.
Hmm.
How have you? Yeah, let me pause there. What comes up for you
Yeah.
as you do that?
Well, it reminds me the first, not he's actually not the first coach I worked with, but the first gentleman that I worked with that I really looked up to as a mentor, and yeah, just like a mentor figure that I still keep in touch with in my life. He has a saying, keep your death close. And that's what it evoked from me is knowing that my years on this planet are limited, knowing that my life, at least in this human body right now, is finite. What do I want to, how do I choose to spend my life? What matters to me? And that can be an overstimulating question sometimes. I'm like, I want to do so many things. There's so many things. It actually brings up the saying that discipline creates freedom for me.
Mm,
In a weird way, right? Like setting
yeah,
constraints actually can be really helpful for my psyche, and I think for the human psyche. Brings up the paradox of choice a little bit, and how when if we just commit to a path, if I just commit to a path and a thing, if I am fully in a moment, then I'm available for life to happen. It's a simple way to put it.
yeah,
Yeah. So like if I keep my death close, then I'm more likely to act on in alignment with who I am, what matters to me. Uh yeah. And I don't know exactly how constraints play into that other than to know that there's a level of urgency that life brings because we know that we don't have forever. There's a lot in the kind of biohacking and longevity space around extending human life forever. And it does inherently give us meaning that we have a lot of time on the planet and it's also limited. It's constrained. So that's
yeah.
that's a couple thoughts I have about it.
Wow. Yes. So such good thoughts. The other thing that's almost a memento mori saying, right? Keep your death close, remember
Hmm.
death. It's so beautiful to bring our finitude in into our consciousness as a reminder that as a reminder to act,
Yes.
and get closer to our meaning. And I think that that brings us to another one of the other things that I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, which is there's this tension I know I've been feeling in my life, and you seem to agree with this, Mike. This tension between action and taking action and moving towards, or living a life that's in alignment with what the best life looks like, the flourishing life looks like for us. And then sitting back and, and sitting in stillness and quiet and solitude, and not striving or trying to act.
Mm,
Um, both of these feel important to living a meaningful life to me. How do you think about them?
mm. I recently attended a workshop that was led by Liz Gilbert and Rob Bell up at Omega Institute. And it was centered around the art of creation. And I think you could easily title it something about meaning too. And there was a visual that we drew about what's, what is stillness? Why is stillness important? And then when do we act on the thing that matters to us? Like how do we do this dance of being in stillness and taking action, or masculine, feminine, whatever you want to call it? And I think, I can speak to a couple of clues that I pay attention to in my body for when I'm too much in doing and when I'm too much in stillness.
Please, yeah.
So I think it's the one that happens more often for me is when I'm too much in doing. And a couple of things that I pay attention for when I'm too much in doing and not in enough stillness, not sitting still, not allowing. My mind goes really fast. My jaw gets really tight. I hear the same songs on loop over and over again in my head. That's actually a cool sign for me to pay attention to.
Me too. I'm so happy that you called that out, because I don't know if I've ever brought that up with anyone, but I feel that too. And I was like, am I insane? But that's so good that it happens for you too.
And that's when I'm too much in my head, too much in doing, too much in masculine, then that's a big one for me. I notice that thoughts, I ruminate more on a thought, like the thought will cycle over and over again, or the song that I most recently listened to will go over and over again. And there's a level of tightness in my body too. And another thing I would maybe notice is if I'm reading a text message, I'm already on to the next thing. Like there's very much a future gazing element, and a yearning. I was gonna say yawning, a longing and a yearning in me. Like it just feels like I need to go get life and it's escaping me.
Yeah.
Those are great signs for me to slow the F down and do nothing. Not to go to my email and then create the next LinkedIn post and then do this and prepare for my podcast. Do the opposite.
Hmm.
And that's been hard for me. It's hard for me to just be like, no, all that will happen. I just need to sit here for 20 minutes. So those are the things I look for on that poll. Too much in stillness, man. What comes up for me there? So what happens sometimes for me, if I really allow myself to feel everything that's happening in me to completion, is that I just feel like I am pure love and pure consciousness. That's the simplest way to put it. And
Good thing.
it's a great thing. It's an amazing thing. And uh one thing that happens sometimes for me is that I will use that to spiritually bypass uh my desires. Like I make my desire for something a bad thing. My desire to have a bigger podcast following, a bad thing. For a bigger, more thriving coaching business, a bad thing. Uh, I don't know if that's necessarily a result of doing stillness too much, but I think that when I'm in a place of life is good, I'm content, I'm really grateful, and can just be in that. Sometimes I am spiritually bypassing on well, what do I want to create? I can create life too. It's not just about being with life. I get to create life and step into autonomy, agency, power, choice. all of that. So what do I want? If I were to
Wow.
dictate what life is, how I'm doing life, what would I dictate for life? And that's a big edge for me too. I've gotten pretty adept at responding to the circumstances of life, but what do I want feels edgy for me. Feels edgy. What do I want to create? What do I get to create? What's the world that I want to be a part of? And actually acting on that. If I just feel into it all the time, then it feels good personally, but no results are being generated.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. One of the things I'll add from my own experience, and I know we're closing up on time here, so I want to be cognizant of that. One of the things I'll add for me when I'm too much in stillness is that I notice that, to me, self-compassion can often look like stillness.
Mhm.
It can look like sitting, it can look like solitude, taking time to myself. Um, and what I notice when I'm too much in stillness is that compassion turns into pity,
Mm.
self-pity, and the self-pity is like, it's precluding me from taking an action or a desire that I genuinely want. Um, and that is like, that's the hallmark for me. I notice that, like, I'll feel like a tension in myself and oftentimes that shows up as my inner critic coming out,
Mm.
telling me that, I'm lazy or whatever. But I think beneath that, what it's signposting me to is that I'm not listening to my desire to take action on something that's core to me. So that's what I've noticed within myself. I'll notice like a bit of maybe antsiness
Yeah,
in my body, a little bit of jitteriness.
yeah, that resonates a lot with me too. And
Yeah.
it's part of the dance. Part of the dance is learning to feel these things. I don't know if that's if I mean I do know actually. You've spoken about this. Compassion is something that you and I are really actively learning right now. It
Mhm.
wasn't part of our programming necessarily, and it there's a lot to that word. Compassion can feel, sometimes it just feels like a sinking, squishy love feeling, but I think that I'm learning that compassion also can be fierce and involve action and taking a stand for something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so good. Kristen Neff talks about this, like the
Yes.
your self-compassion versus, I don't know what's the other form, like the that you talk, like the norm, like the squishy form of it.
Yeah. I don't know what the other form is, but I
Maybe
love the way she speaks about it. Like compassion's got more, it does have a masculine side to it.
yeah, yeah, it's beautiful to know, and that really does seem like some of the antidote here. I think we're veering off to a compassion conversation, which we could talk about for hours, and we have. Um, it, it's it's such an important component. I think I'll to bring it back to meaning. Compassion is such an important component of this journey because meaning making is this ongoing process, and it's something that I think you've put very beautifully is a dance. It's a dance of connecting with ourselves, understanding what we care about, understanding what we value, and what the spirit is telling us, and then creating that in the world around us. So there's this dance of listening and doing,
Yeah.
um, and that takes time. And we're not always going to be perfect at the balance there, and that's where self-compassion comes in during this process because it's hard.
Hmm. That's a beautiful way to end the conversation. So I think another thing that feels important in terms of compassion as it pertains to this conversation is life is not going to feel meaningful sometimes, at least for me. Like
Yeah.
life feels really hard sometimes, and that's where compassion can be really helpful for me. And I know that that's probably true for a lot of people. Is that we never figure this thing out.
Yeah.
I know that I will never figure life out, and there are lots of parts of me that want to figure it out. So compassion is a beautiful tool to have when I drift and feel lost and like, what the hell is my purpose? Because that happens.
Yeah, that's so true. Um, Yeah, I'll cap it with I actually woke up this morning with a little bit of, I don't know if it was boredom or low grade anxiety, and just this thought came up of like, this is it. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And it's just the mundane. The mundane. I brushed my teeth, I worked out, I drove the same drive that I've driven, hundreds of times.
Hmm.
And uh yeah, it was so mundane, but also sublime, in noticing that my own reaction to the mundane. And I think, that brings it back to what you were talking about, that we get to make our meaning in every moment. And so much of our life is mundane,
Hmm.
and not these exciting Instagram moments that we often would like it to be. Um, yeah, so I'll wrap with that. Um,
Beautiful.
any any other thoughts from you, Mike?
Yeah, it's like the very simple. It's not what you're doing; it's how you're doing it, right? And
Yeah,
that's what I hear at the end. I could do. I envision myself brushing teeth, going to the gym, doing the same drive or the same walk on a day where I'm plugged in. That feels incredible. The mundane feels amazing, and on a day where I'm drifted and lost, it feels terrible. So
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
good place to end.
That's such a good place. Okay, let me stop recording here. Oh, yes, you have to stop.
Yeah.